But let's get to the point. What you see on the screen, and has been there for quite a while, and it's going to be for quite a while, is a picture by Alberto Flammer, photographer from the Locarnese region, of a vineyard in our region of Almagia. It's actually not far away from here. It's like 1 hour drive. What interests us of this picture is not, let's say, the ethnological aspect, or let's say how people used to live back then, or how hard the work of our ancestor was. What obsesses us is it's rather something else. Is that even though this structure was built in a time when, as you can well see, people would still paint skeletons as a form of devotion. People that we, of course, wouldn't understand anymore in the way they think. But it still kind of has a timeless character. And it embodies, in that sense, a manifestation, a fundamental manifestation of architecture as an intellectual and cultural activity. With very simple words, when we see these pictures, we have the feeling that that's the interpretation we want to give to architecture, and the kind of architecture we want to identify with and therefore to build. But if we get a closer look to the thing, we could of course assign this artifact to the well-known category of architecture without architects, right? You all know it. And of course, it's a category that is particularly popular at this time, the time we live in, marked by the skepticism and diffidence towards architects. And yet, even if we would, of course, not be wrong assigning it to the architecture without architects, we would probably not also not being completely right. And we want to explain a little bit more what we mean. Because you will probably agree with us that one cannot say that this vineyard on the slope, surrounded by a continuous dry stone wall and marked by this small decorated chapel in the front, doesn't respond to the same intellectual intent that drives the architect's thinking. And if we look at the substance that we see, we notice that the slope within the enclosing wall is kept plain and clean, without any emerging stone that would damage the blade of the sickle that cuts the hay for the beasts. The grass is kept short, also to let the wind blow through the vine, climbing from the terraced soil. You see these couple of terraces. To the transparent pergolas made of the same flexible branches that once belonged to the surrounding trees. The dry stone walls follows the slope diagonally from the sides towards the top, and curves along a continuous arch at the top and bottom in the shape of an egg. Besides protecting the precious fruit from wild animals, this, what it's in our perspective a very precisely shaped wall, protects also the entire garden from the strong waters that would run along the slope during the storm, and would otherwise carry away the work of the builder. So if we would stop here with the description, this piece of architecture would stay, sort of pragmatic arrangement of useful architectural devices in order to produce. And yet, there's something more to it. The contained circular structure reminds us of an ideal garden, a perfectly cultivated island in a sea of wilderness. It is probably the presence of this intellectual intention, not in a place of representation or power, where we are actually used to find it, but in a place of production, of effort, of work. That makes us talk of a fundamental manifestation of architecture. The 4 projects that we are going to show you share the same shape, the circle, declined and stretched under the pressure of different principles, as the one of the protecture, in the case of the vineyard, that are inherent to the very geometrical and spatial shape of the circle. These topics are going to be the contained growth, the central construction, the circular flows, and the unoriented enclosure.
So the first project that we show you is a... Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. The first project that we show you is a schoolhouse nearby St. Gallen, specifically in this township called Arneg-Anville. The building site is the green spot in the middle. What fascinated us was the typology of settlements that we encounter and that we have never worked with before. Since the first moments, we had the feeling that we needed to understand the form of urbanization first in order to provide a specific answer for the public building. Looking at the history of it, we saw that the town got the shape that it has nowadays through the uncoordinated process of growth of 2 small towns which have grown into a unity. What is peculiar of these rural settlements becoming one suburb is that the process of growth will follow, for pragmatists rather than for planning culture, the existing country roads. Analyzing the timeline of the development, we observe that the pattern of growth will follow the logic of single cells that pop up at different times and totally independently from what was happening nearby. They only share the fact that they are laying one next to the other, never isolated. And if we look closer to one of these cells, we see that they are composed by almost identical buildings that have all the same size, the same function, and the same appearance. One aspect that was interesting us was that they all together, as a series, they form somehow coherent unity of larger scale. The first consideration, looking at the program of the competition brief, was that the township wanted a school that would be as big as one of these suburban cells. The new building will be therefore closer in scale to the curved roads than to the built substance. This becomes evident in the moment we compare the size of a classroom being not any different to the size of a one-family home. In good or bad, this form of urbanization was specific enough to build on it. We therefore started to conceive the program of the schoolhouse as one of the cells, giving particular attention to how to place every single room of the program in relation to one another, as if they were little houses. After applying all the regulation and criteria about schoolhouses, the layout of the single pieces of program will be as simple as that. Every classroom is oriented toward the outside, never to north, along the periphery, and all the common rooms, such as the sport hall or the workshops, are placed in the center of the village. As you can see, the arrangement of rooms is not following obediently a given structure or composition. It is rather the direct consequence of a logic of contained expansion in which every single atom of the molecule finds the most suitable position and orientation. So the unorthodox resulting arrangement of the classroom is not per se the quality we were investing on. We were rather focusing on the in-between spaces that in conventional suburban structures will be the one used as garden or a parking plot. And we were interested how to program them as didactical activities. The most relevant quality of ground structure is that it is subordinated to what exists already. in our case, the inclination of the side slope. As you can see there are more than 6 meter height difference from one corner to the other. So we need to figure out a way to move all the kids across the school remaining parallel to the existing terrain. We are convinced that such a system of in-between spaces connected by ramps, stairs, and shortcuts following the topography will produce the phenomenology of animated village, representing an ideal special condition for the informal moments of learning that are becoming more and more important in today's pedagogical approach. And we were confident that the kids could use intuitively these kind of spaces, that could appropriate it, like these two girls in the picture running across the fields rather than walking around or simply looking at it. And to uniform the series of elements, so classrooms, corridors, informal learning spaces, etc., we proposed a roof which is as much in dialogue as possible with the topography that crosses the school. So an inclined platform perfectly parallel to the abstract slope of the ground. As you can see from this aerial view, while the single volumes grouped in form of a cell appear as an extension of the suburban pattern, from a closer perspective, thanks to the shape of the inclined roof, the new building starts a conversation with the elements of wider scale. The three lines following the creek, the main road, the slope. In our perspective, it starts to become a harder piece of the landscape. Like in a village, you can access the building from different sides without any hierarchy. So every child coming from any direction will find spontaneously his or her entrance, developing a different memory of the main facade of his or her schoolhouse. As you see there, there are 13 peripheral rooms with potential for to come on the left side. And in between them are placed the entrances, alternate with areas for concentrated learning in smaller groups. What for us is the most important quality of the school is the contrasting speciality between the sequence of uninterrupted informal learning spaces and the ordinary well-proportioned spaces. The dense pattern of interior spaces, always starting from a small courtyard, as you see here, opens up in a piazza that will be used as a main hall. The open animated spaces are sometimes oriented to the outside and sometimes toward the inside, but always referring strolling to the natural slope that never ceases to be an orientation point. During the intermediate discussion, the teachers were enthusiastic and explained to the architects of the jury that the children would have used the ramps or the big step to do their math exercises. They also questioned the very idea of main entrance, saying that the scholars would have found their own specific path to the classroom. We were very happy actually to hear that the perception and appropriation of spaces was recognized by school team as a learning process towards a higher awareness of the child towards his or her environment.
The second declination of circular structure is actually an already existing one. So a one that we didn't have to design, but rather to simply understand. Some of you may recognize the place. We are on the Gotthard Pass and in the center of Europe. And what we were asked to do is basically to restore this small building here, right next to the old hospice that you may know from the refurbishing project by Miller-Maranthem. if the big construction of the hospice would serve as a refugee for people crossing the Alps until the end of the 19th century, the smaller building would do the same for them, the horses. The actual economical source that together with the people that would guide them described the economy of this region. No matter what the weather condition was, the goods needed to go from north to south and from south to north. The small structure caught the attention of an important figure of the 18th century, Rudolf Schinz, an historian and biologist that at the end of the 18th century would receive the mandate to describe the entire territory of Switzerland, so he needed to travel across the Gotthard. And during his stay on top of the mountain, he drew this octagonal-shaped floor plan at the ground floor and its section. And what is peculiar is that it's one of the few buildings that he would draw in his journey. And he also gives a very precise description of the detailed positioning of the 47 horses that would stay within the building. If on the one hand it was relatively easy to trace the substance that composes the object, the octagonal stone wall that you see at the bottom, the central 7.5 meter high column, and the original structure made of wooden, it's large, beams, and the iron sheets that covered in rust, that are almost more rust than metal, that were placed at the beginning of the 20th century. On the other hand, it seemed impossible, or let's say very difficult, if not impossible, to reconstruct the reasons that led to the construction of such a profane building. You know, you must imagine the smell that it was inside, in such a pure form, the octagon. And it was only looking at the historical pictures, such as this one, shot in spring, not in winter, that we could get a sense of the weight of snow that would entirely cover the structure, putting the very permanence of the building at stake. We were able to understand the specific behavior of the structure, considering it a straightened-up dome, where the horizontal rings are only active under compression. Here you see the behavior of a dome where the rings from the middle start to be in traction, and here the specific, say, dome in cone shape where all the rings are in compression. This explains why the beams, heavily underdimensioned as singular elements, put together built a grid that supported the impressive weight of the snow. The first steps were the restoration of the main radial carpentry and the substitution of the perimetral rings that were not to be saved. Only in the moment in which the structure was completed or recompleted, the building would reflect its inner logic within such a monumental landscape. We weren't actually unsure if we were building the object or just the inner skin of that beautiful landscape. The only element that we inserted, let's say as a new element, was what it was in the existing building, the weakest point, which is the traction ring that transmitted the shape, the forces of the roof to the wall that we did out of concrete, or that we substituted out of concrete. And of course, you see from the detail that the new roof would be a ventilated roof. On this drawing, you see all the pieces of the roof structure that come together in an irregular yet radial way. And I want to point out the irregularities because we think they are very important to understand such structure. For example, this triangle, it's quite ideal. No? It has the two sides, the longer sides, and then the middle one. And this one, for example, starts with two. One goes to the top, and the other goes to the intermediate beam. So it's always a dialogue between, pragmatism and reaction to the structure. And this drawing has been, let's say, the most important drawing to design the outer skin. Could be unlogical, but what we wanted to do is that this system would somehow transmit the same logic to the outer skin that you see in this drawing. And that's why, for example, we reduced the thickness or the dimension of the metal plates that are these ones, that are just 25 centimeters, and position them in relation to the longer side of the triangles and not in relation to the base as you would do in a normal metal roof. The two pictures show before and after the transformation of the roof in 1916. And during the process of transformation, the element that we worked on the most was this black line here, no? That is the actual permanent element during all the transformations of the buildings, which is the cantilever of the roof. And we thought this was the very element to preserve in order to keep that beautiful detachment between the earthworks and the roof construction. And this is why we worked basically only on this scale, this 1:5, 1:2 scale. And we were basically trying to disassemble the single layers of the new roof so that it was possible to keep the minimum thickness that you would see as an abstract, sharp line that determines the appearance of the building. Here you see the alternated layers of large boards and copper presented, in an understandable way, in a direct way. You see how they are oriented, you see the role they have, and so on. And in order to kind of reinforce the monolithic quality of the roof, we absolutely wanted to construct the folding line between the single sides in the exact same way as the joint between the parallel elements, which is not that easy. I mean, you have two plates that come together and in 4 layers of metal, and at these points you join at a certain point 8 layers of metal that you have to fold together by hand. And this wheel or umbrella structure is not only, let's say, pressed on the outer skin, but is also reflected as much in the interior structure of the intermediate slab. The partition walls and the beams, they all converge towards the central column. And what fascinated us and what we wanted to preserve is that each fragment of the space carries the traces of the exact relation between all parts and this kind of central structure. And the understanding of the overall structure was indispensable. You could also say you just looked at it, but it was indispensable for the insertion of the new element, which is the stair, that leads to the first floor. We analyzed the single portion of the circle in order to identify, let's say, a coherent way to insert it. And this portion here, for example, this interested us a lot because this beam that starts from the middle of the side, that was probably reaching the center, was at a certain point probably damaged. And so they chopped it, the head that was damaged, and they just turned it and connected to the side. producing actually kind of rectangular voids where one could fit a stair. So we had to replace these two beams that were not to be saved, and we said, okay, we simulate what happens here to insert the stair. So it's not the stair that comes, but it's just the space in between that is clear from the understanding of the building. And in restoration projects, architects are usually interested in what really changes, typologically or visually or whatever. And we were also incredibly fascinated by what is just substituted. And substituted in the sense that it's you change everything by keeping the same logic. Like it's the example of this of the floor boards of the first floor. On the left side, you see the boards that were removed, and on the right side, directly from the sewing workshop, that were to be placed in the exact same thickness, in varying width, and let's say the length was given and needed to be adapted to the triangular shapes of the pavement. And even though the majority of the material has been substituted, the central constructive logic, the geometrical perception of space, and most importantly, the relationship between each piece was kept in what we consider intact. And we were happy in the end because we didn't change the building in its main qualities. For us, it was enough to make visible the constructive, geometrical, and spatial coherence of this simple yet time-ascending structure. This becomes even more important when, for example, even looking at a fragment of it, you still comprehend the entire construction. We are fascinated by the fact that even if you don't see the center of the structure, you can precisely say where it is, how high it is, and what is the role of this center within the construction. And we love the fact that in the end, this metal roof, this striped metal roof, somehow reminds the joints of the boarding that you see in the inside of the space and that are oriented in the exact same direction. And let's say, as last impressions, we want to share the tribute dedicated to this column that we want to be perceivable in the total height, in the interior space, and that where every elements of construction converges.
The next application of the circle and its intrinsic principle is a competition project for a bus depot and workshops in Riazzino. As you know, everywhere public transport is gaining more and more importance, and with it the need of new infrastructure. But the scarcity of the resource ground makes every square centimeter very precious to park the vehicle, to repair them, and so on. We therefore analyze the plot under the perspective of the flows with the aim to identify the highest number of parking spots for buses. Besides conventional building restrictions such as maximum height or area ratio, the main criteria for such an exercise is the steering radius of the vehicles. So we try to make the path of the buses as efficient as possible, and due to the geometry of the site, the circle was by far the most efficient. So the most efficient way to drive around the building gives shape to the building itself. You can see that on the left side, the buses will drive in the workshop from the bottom and exit from the top. On the right side, the buses enter the depot from the top, and in the morning, once they run out all together very quickly, they are already directed towards the street. The building is nothing else than a device to direct the circular movement of the buses. This becomes evident in the proportion of the central volume that hosts the storage, the changing rooms, and the administration. Its dimension is given by the steering radius that a bus parked in the last lane of the workshop needs to drive to park in the first line of the bus depot. So from every point, a bus is able to drive from one sector to the other. Now we zoom in the floor plan of the building that is basically a one-floor building with a symmetrical arrangement around the central volume. For the movement of the buses, it's very important that both the facade of entrance and exit and the space of parking are free from any statical elements, such as a column or a wall. This allows both an undisturbed drive within the building and the maximum flexibility to transform the workshop in depot and vice versa. This is possible when you span the roof in the opposite direction of circulation. The very primitive system of load-bearing elements is ordered in independent rows that span from one side to the center and over to the other side. We didn't have particular ambition in the geometry of the structure. We just wanted it to be as light and dense as possible. We were actually very frustrated because we couldn't find anything light and dense enough within the realm of architecture. So the turning moment was when our engineer Luca Pizzetti explained us the analogy between the bus depot and this model of Austrian monoplane from World War I. A structure marked by covering wings provided with compression elements and a web of cables carrying the pressure of the air to the central body. We transfer the same logic to the roof of the bus depot. The only compression elements are the actual roof and the short vertical pillars on the roof. Everything else is as thin as a traction cable. The peculiarity of this system that makes different from a common truss system is that it needs to be spanned on the side, somehow like a tent. If you don't span it from the side, it collapses on itself. So in order to reveal this specificity, somehow also its fragility, we decided to collect the forces of every row into one hanging beam. This element spans along the entire length of the building and is pulled to ground by two couples of concrete walls that are at the same time a protection against the rain for the refuel and washing row. All pieces are therefore connected into one structure that is as light as possible, almost inexplicably suspended over the ground. Spanning the entire structure above and around this vast space provides the necessary stiffness to the fragile paper-like roof that covers it. A stiffness that is visible and exposed as part of the surrounding infrastructural landscape. Maybe you can now understand why we were interested in a light, dense, and dissolved structure. We hope that this exposed structure will continue the web of high voltage lines and electric infrastructure, like this one next to the site. In this sense, our proposal can be understood as the amplification and densification of already existing elements. We wanted to pay a tribute to the infrastructure that power our cities. So applying and declining the principle of a circle and its flows, we were able to offer 30% more bus spots than they thought possible to fit in the plot.
The last project we want to share with you is our competition proposal for a small kindergarten in a place right nearby here in Mendrisio that is called Latte Caldo. It was actually one of the first competitions that we did together. And the kindergarten was meant to be placed on the left side of the valley at the limit of the forest, in this point here. A particularly exposed site where just by moving a couple of meters on the left or right side, you would open different views to the valley or to the opposite directions. So somehow unexpectedly from a sloped side, we couldn't identify a main orientation. Normally you look either to the mountain or to the valley, and in this case there was not such a main orientation, but rather an exposure in all directions. And in other words, it was the perfect place to place the playground for the kindergarten. It was simply missing one thing, the fence, to enclose the kids. It was clear that the building would need primarily, first of all, a fence before being a building. And in order to, collect in a shape the playground. And we decided to build this fence with the help of the service rooms that were asked by the program, such as restrooms, storage, and meeting rooms that we translated in these barrel-like volumes. This ring that would build the fence of the playground would also act as an inner support for a roof construction made of radial wooden beams, spanning from the fence to an outer perimeter wall enclosing all the activities of the kindergarten. It is a kindergarten for 2 classes, and this made it possible to organize all the spaces without a distribution, and actually only thinking it in a specular way. At the head and tail, you would have the common rooms and the entrances, and like rings of a chain, the single functions of each class would be connected together on a continuous path on the right side and left side. If from an organizational point of view, the 2 classes are almost identical, their development in heights follow the opposite movement, climbing or descending the waved slope through gentle ramps on the right side, that are these symbols, or through stairs on the left side. Despite the primitive, intent to enclose in the simplest way the playground with a circular fence, we were more interested in deforming it or contaminating it, this very pure gesture, with the richness of the site. Richness that we identified also in this corrugated grass slope, manifestation of the palimpsest written by the never-ending negotiation between geology and human activity. The drawing that reveals this contamination the most is surely the development of the facade, that reveal the consequences of disturbing the circular facade with the topography. What we liked is that the morbid shape of the building would let, at least in our eyes, let this ground literally untouched or going through the building, even if it was covered by it. Somehow also following a similar logic to the existing primary school that was already built in the 70s. That is somehow sometimes elevated from the ground, sometimes follow different levels. There was another aspect that we borrowed from that existing building and that we adopted in our proposal, and is the shed roof, the single shed roof. And we adopted it in the exact same inclination. You know, there was no reason to change, and we decided to orient it towards the center of the playground. For us, it was important somehow that when you are in the playground, thanks to the inclination of the roof, your view would be somehow directed towards the opposing mountains and not to the building itself. This is the principle of a fence that contains, but it is somehow transparent. And the extroverted character of the playground, this is, or let's say what we believe to be the extroverted character of the playground, would be strengthened by the ascending terrain, from where the children would be able to really overlook the building. For example, in this point here, where you would see over the building. But the resulting architectural quality of the inside spaces actually interested us even more, because the continuous sequence of spaces of the kindergarten, we wanted them to have a great ambivalence. And in particular, we wanted that on the one side, it takes the shape of, let's say, what we called a bent enfilade along the peripheral wall, where singular spaces are connected to one another along this wall, suggesting the sense of continuity, of never-ending sequence of rooms. On the other side, we wanted to feel in the space, transversally exposed in front of the open facade spanned between the cylindrical service volumes. Our expectation would be to feel at the same time in what we call a concentric extension of this playground, and at the same time feel protected in this ring, in this architectural ring that defines it. And this would be the resulting floor plan of the project. Thanks for the attention. Time for questions?
Of course.
Great.
Thank you, Giulia and Hermes. Does anyone have questions?
Hello. Thank you for this lecture. I quite liked it. So you talked about fragility a lot in a few of your projects. And that reminds me of so many things, like how Lütjens approached the architecture as an impermanent act. And a particular example is in your octagonal building, how the roof is articulated is blatantly a reference to ASBR's visitor center. So I was thinking, and these guys are architects who really approach architecture with the thoughts of the impermanence in mind. And I was wondering what your thoughts were directly to the idea of impermanence in architecture.
I didn't understand exactly who you were referring to that was interested to impermanence, but maybe it doesn't matter. It's, I think the question is particularly, or let's say, if we would have shown other projects, it would be even more relevant, this topic of the impermanence, because you may wonder, no? We showed only competition projects that we didn't win. How do you make a living, And we actually made a living, or make a living, with restoration of buildings, like protected buildings that need to be restored, very simply. And it's a very scientific discipline, actually better than teaching. I recommend it. And because it's you really have to deal with the question of permanence all the time, because you have to question yourself what you want to keep. You want to keep the substance or the principle. And you are always swinging between these two concepts. And in the end, we are very badly cultivated about permanence. We think that a building is either a pyramid or a barrack. We don't see anything in between. We don't see that process of changing the skin from time to time, to change the installation from time to time, and this is it's actually inherent with the building. And before it was always, if you look at traditional construction, you would always assemble things so that you see if they are damaged, for example. And this is a super important aspect that we also want to keep in new buildings, because what we want is that they stay for the longest time span as possible. But in order to do so, you have to give the tools to the person that are going to come to understand what you did. And I think this level of understandability is what shifts the discourse of permanence from what architects want to what the building wants. I hope I somehow answered the question.
Thank you.
My question has to do with the configuration of the schools, because I saw a pattern with sort of semi-round buildings that sort of enclose and turn inward. So I wonder maybe how the experience of working on that octagonal refuge, kind of shaped your idea about like organization of space, and whether it's an intentional thing to have kind of program turn inward into itself as opposed to, externally.
You're referring to the kindergarten, or to the other one?
Yeah, the schools mostly.
Yeah.
But maybe, I don't know, maybe it relates to the Swiss refuge in the mountains.
I mean, if the question is if one influenced the other, I think it would be wrong to say no, because your design experience always influences you in a strong way. And I think also the youngest you are, the most every project influences your way of thinking. I guess you were a student, you are experiencing that very strongly, that after each semester you change a little bit your way to approach a design. And in that sense, of course, it influenced. But I wouldn't say that there was, the picture pinned at the wall during the design or something. It was this school. For us, it was more important the movement of these two little girls that would simply cross the field, and we wanted to somehow, keep that quality intact. That the school wouldn't be a building that would substitute the slope, but rather being the crystallization of that slope.